So soils, every single soil has its specific soil type and its profile. The profile is if I dig out the soil or dig a trench in the soil and I look at the layers from the surface, like I see here, and I move down. There's the top layer or horizon and different horizons as you move deeper until you run out of soil. You hit bedrock. And these different types of soils and their profile or types and depths of horizons will dictate a lot of the possibilities and limitations on what you might be able to grow there. And you also will look at the sand, silt, and clay, the grittiness or fineness. If it's very gritty, it's got a lot of sand in it. If it's very, very smooth and silky, it probably has a lot of silt in it. If it is very sticky with microscopically small particles that hold on to a lot of water, it probably is a high clay content soil. So the numbers on the outside of this triangle represent percentages, and every intersection, if you were to follow it out, would be 100%. So for example, this little intersection right below the word clay has, in this example, 60% clay. I'm following into the triangle with the arrow, so 60% clay. And it has 20% silt and 20% sand. 60, 20, 20, that's 100%. And every one of these intersections would be the same thing. And where the intersection occurs for your soil sample tells you which of these 12 possible soil textural class examples your soil is. And you'll notice also that these classes are not organized in some nice, neat pattern where they're all the same size and shape. No, this is kind of a bizarre set of different shapes and sizes, and even some things that have a little bizarre, um, almost like a little bump off the side on this silty loam where there's like a little bird's beak sticking out here. Um, they're the shapes they are and the sizes they are because every soil within each of these colored areas behaves similarly in its ability for water to penetrate and hold in the soil or drain through, if hold or not hold, nutrient capacity, cation exchange capacity, root penetration, tilth, which is the crumbliness or whether you have big old clods of clay versus you have powdery soil or nice, what I like to call cookie crumb texture. They behave very similarly within these given areas. So clay is a dominant type of particle because as little as 40% of clay, right along here, just 41%, just over that line, and it's just clay. You call it just clay because 40% clay, unless you're way over on these corners here, sandy clay or silty clay, it behaves pretty much the same. It's just clay as far as the farmer is concerned with texture. And texture is just one important number. You also look at other things like the actual minerals there, the nutrients, the amount of organic matter, the depth of the soil, the water table, and all kinds of other uh, influencing factors add to the big picture of what kind of soil do I have. And you can do a really quick and easy sedimentation experiment. This is something that might be done by some schools in grade school or high school. And you could make a quick estimate. What kind of soil do I think I have? There are more accurate ways to do it than this, but it's still a fun and easy experiment to do. And you could look at determining soil type by sedimentation and Google it and find some recipes for how to do this. And people have done sampling all over the country and created these soils maps. This is a segment of a map that's somewhere in the general Paso Robles area. So you can see Highway 46 and 101. Here's the intersection of those two. So if you're familiar with the Paso Robles area, you know roughly where we're talking about here. And all of these different colors and numbers represent a soil type. Now, this isn't, excuse me, this isn't one of the 12 soil textural classes. This includes lots of detail, like I said. The soil number 106, as it is right here, if I were to look up soils number 106 in this Paso Robles soil index, I would find out a lot more about that soil, not just its texture, but also minerals, depth, horizons, and all kinds of detail that is included in the definition or description of soil type 106. And there'll be a name for it as well. In our maps in Monterey County, we use letters instead of numbers, but it's the same concept. So here is a very gross generic soils map of Monterey County. This is the Salinas Valley. This black line going through is the 101 corridor. And you can see the major areas of soil formation. Here's off of the Gavilan Range off of Old Stage Road. And so there's a lot of the decomposed granite from the Gavilan Mountains decomposing, the granite Gavilan Mountains decomposing for millions of years. And what do you get? You get the soils that we have off of Old Stage Road. We get very different types of soils along the coast region, etc. So you can look at the gross regional type of soils maps that we have here, very coarse analysis. And if I were to drill down and look at something closer, it would look much more like that detail map of Paso Robles, where this area that looks uniform right here probably has a whole bunch of different soil types when you were to, if you were to make a little box and drill down and look, what are all the soils in that tiny box? So let's say this is your specific map. You've got your different ranch blocks, and within the ranch blocks, you've got these different soil types. And some of these different soil types are going through the middle of fields. So I've got different soils in this particular long, narrow block right here. So I need to take that into consideration. There might be certain things that I need to worry about or do when I'm managing that soil based on what this soil map is telling me and other observations that I've made in the field itself using the good old-fashioned shovel. Nothing replaces a good old-fashioned shovel to figure out what's going on in your fields. Dig down, look. Or if you need to dig down deeper, a backhoe. Just be careful. Backhoe trenches can be very dangerous. People die every year by going into trenches and having them collapse. By the time somebody digs you out, you are dead. So know what you're doing and know how to shore up or brace a trench if you do need to make one and go into it. Just be careful. Microclimate, same considerations as we've already been through, just they're on a smaller scale. It's not just what kind of weather climate we're having in Salinas, but what is specifically happening on my ranch. Your ranch has its own wind patterns, its own sun patterns. You know, I've been baking my brains out over off of River Road on what seemed to be a hot day, and a mile away or less, it's freezing. It's still foggy. You know, the fog can hang out on the east side in this main Salinas Valley, and it's the fog burned off on certain parts of River Road 2 hours ago. Very different patterns. There are other considerations. What about the economy? You need transportation. We're blessed here with the 101 corridor. That has made our industry cities live and die based on the corridor of a new highway or an old highway. Uh, there was tons of politics when they put in I-5 going right through California. Some cities didn't have the political clout and they became nothing. Other places that had I-5 going right through them, boom towns, because all that money coming in buying gas and stopping at hotels, shopping, da 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 da. It completely changed and flipped some of the towns. And again, a lot of politics, but it makes a big difference. If you are 15 miles closer to a major freeway, that cuts your costs in trying to do transportation uh, to get your materials in, get your harvested product out. You need people to do all of that. So you need labor, and that's getting worse every year and more difficult every year. We're frequently counteracting some of the problems with labor by improved technology using automation and planting and weeding, thinning, um, all kinds of different automation, which counteracts some of the losses for labor. Um, and some people say, oh, all this automation is replacing humans. Well, not really. I mean, in some cases, you might say that is true, but what I've seen in agriculture is not really that at all. It's not that they're making people go away. It's that as people are going away, engineers are having to solve the problems of doing it mechanically with a smaller crew. Um, do you have buyers? You need a customer for your product. Somebody has to buy it once I make it, right? And maybe I've got to cool it, I've got to chop it, I've got to package it, I've got to ship it, I've got to do all of these things. Where is it going to go? Am I going to be responsible for it after it leaves the field to get it cooled and chopped and bagged and then I sell it? Or do I sell the whole field? And now it's somebody else's problem. I get it to the point of harvest and I walk away. I sell it to the customer before it's even left the field. Lots of different considerations. In processing tomatoes, if you're doing processing tomatoes over in the Stockton area or something like that, you probably have your tomatoes virtually purchased on contract before you even plant. It's already sold. It's going to Heinz ketchup or wherever it's going. They told you what variety to plant and what day to plant it, and they told you everything because you're doing a contracted service growing for them. The advantage, you got a buyer. The disadvantage, they tell you what to do and when to do it, at least to get started in terms of the variety and the planting date. You're responsible for all the details, getting it done. But if the market's really high on the day that you harvest, you got a contracted price. So, for example, in lettuce, I'm not familiar with tomato prices good enough to say it, but on lettuce, I remember being in areas where we generally said if you didn't make $6 or $7 a box, a carton, it wasn't worth harvesting. You'd lose money. It costs that much just to harvest it. So to make money or to get it out of the field, you've got to at least make that just so you don't waste your money on harvest. Um, plus, you need some growing costs thrown in there. You want to be covering that so you're not losing money still. And so you have a contract, and maybe your contract is for X number of dollars, whatever it is, going to Fresh Express or Taylor Farms, and you pre-sell it in advance, and you're going to make a nice profit. But on the day that it's harvesting, because there might have been a shortage or a problem, you're giving your product to Taylor Farms at the contracted price. Somebody else who didn't have a contract might be selling theirs for $50 a case and making just money hand over fist. Problem is, the market might also be down in the toilet. So some people like the stability of contracted prices. Some like having that kind of stock market risk and trying to hit the really big wins. Um, and the markets change. You know, with processing tomatoes, you really don't have much of the choice. You're going to contract it, period, with very, very little, a tiny percentage that is the slop percentage that can growers can grow to play the market with, but most of your stuff is on contract. What about all those input requirements? I need to have equipment and supplies, everything from seed and fertilizer, bags and rubber bands and oil for the tractors and um, wire for my trellises and on and on and on. There's just so much you need. People, management. I need to get water. I need to do all sorts of things to make sure that I get the crop to harvest and then to my customer in whatever form my customer has agreed to. And so those are your gross costs. It costs you a lot to get it out there. And then you make a certain amount of money when you sell it. And when you subtract your gross costs from your gross profit, that leaves you net profit. How much is left over after I'm done paying it all off? So estimated gross profit minus my gross costs. You generally have a pretty good idea what your costs are going to be. Your profit is a little harder unless you are doing contracts. That's easy to estimate if you know that it's going to be contracted. There's seasonal variations as well. You know, there's prices go up and down at different times of the year. So if I'm growing lettuce, well, lettuce prices in April are different than lettuce prices in June or lettuce prices in September. And so you have to take that into account. Supply and demand, a little bit of luck. But I like to say luck favors hard work and knowledge. A lot of people say, oh, that person was lucky. Well, part of it might be luck, but they were prepared to take advantage of that situation because they knew what they were doing. So the whole thing about luck is being prepared when market conditions are right. So, for example, one of the first people I ever worked for here, we always had a field that we would put in very early in Salinas, as early as we could before most people had any lettuce. And it was a sandy soil that allowed us to not only get tractors into it faster, but we had this teeny, teeny, tiny little tractor. All it has to do is be big enough to shape a bed and pull a seeder. That's it. So now when the ground is still wet, for somebody else with a bigger tractor they can't get into, or in clay soil they can't get into it, we already have a field planted. Would we make good money on that field? Maybe, maybe not. But there's always this unknown. It's a very volatile market. So some years, boom, we hit $54 a box, $62 a box. Really made good money off that block. Were we lucky? Was he lucky? I was just there doing research. I wasn't in charge of the planting. But I helped and I did the research. And yeah, he was some lucky to have the lettuce coming off in a really good market. But he was also prepared and smart and thinking it through to have something in the ground, having that teeny tiny tractor that could do that, having leased, or actually that was a purchase, that he owned that piece of ground, having a piece of sandy ground that he could get into before other ground was ready after the rain stopped. Again, luck favors hard work and knowledge. Pest and disease issues. There are lots of problems. When I first came to this town, people were just starting to talk about verticillium in lettuce in the Watsonville area. Now it's everywhere, everywhere. And it spread so quickly. Nobody talked about verticillium in here in the 80s. There was no such thing as verticillium in lettuce. Didn't happen. Not here anyway. It happened in other growing areas, but Salinas, there's no such thing as verticillium. Then all of a sudden, in the early 90s, we got a couple fields that have, what's this? There's something going on. That looks like verticillium. Now it's everywhere and it happens very quickly. So that keeps plant breeders with jobs and job security. People have to keep finding new disease resistance that works in different growing areas, etc. You got to deal with birds and mammals, everything from rabbits and gophers and ground squirrels, deer, uh, hogs, all kinds of things. There's a lettuce-free period. There are two crops, and you want to know this for a test. There are two crops that have production-free periods. And I forget the exact window, but there's a lettuce-free period for lettuce mosaic virus. LMV stands for lettuce mosaic virus. And in order to break the life cycle of the lettuce mosaic virus, in December, in a certain window, you're not allowed to grow any commercial lettuce in commercial production areas here in California. And that reduces the chance of the lettuce mosaic virus being around. It still can live in the weeds and the mouths of aphids and other areas in the community and the environment, but it reduces it dramatically by having this disease-free period. And so legally, you have to follow that. You're a producer, you have to have the lettuce-free period for lettuce. The other crop that I want you to know about is celery. And celery, you can't grow any celery, and I think it's the entire month of January, again, for celery mosaic virus. So, it's not a big deal anyway, really. It's not like there's a huge demand for Central Coast production of celery in January. So, but you just have to be careful. You could be doing research fields or, there are lots of reasons why somebody could potentially have something out there and you just don't do it. Crop rotation helps break up the diseases and insects. Broccoli is one of the great rotation crops because broccoli is an antagonist towards many fungal diseases in the soil. So by growing broccoli after lettuce or strawberries, usually it's strawberries, then lettuce, then broccoli, you help minimize the development of fungal disease causing organisms in the soil. Fertility, you've got to think about what you're going to grow after another crop. Are you going to have cover crops? Are you going to plant legumes of some sort which add nutrients back? What about chemicals? There are certain chemicals you might spray for one crop that are perfectly healthy and good for production of that crop, but they might cause a problem in the next crop. So it's not just what am I doing in this crop, but you need to know what can follow what. And with certain crops, you might spray something that helps that crop grow, but that material that you just sprayed for that crop might prevent you from growing a different crop next, or at least within a certain window. And that window might be too long. So you might have to go 90 days after spraying something before you can go in with whatever, with spinach. You can't go in with spinach because you just sprayed something that's incompatible with spinach. So if I got to wait 90 days, I'm going to pick something else. I'm not going to wait that long. I need to plant something other than spinach that can handle it. We call that plant back. So that is it for crop selection.